Resolute Square.
There was also maintained what was called an enemies list, which was rather extensive and continually being updated.
Democrats want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
I'm Rick Wilson, and this is The Enemies List. Welcome back to The Enemies List. I'm Rick Wilson. Thanks for joining us again. Today, I've got Sarah Ashton-Cirillo, who is a member of the Resolute Square team with the new podcast, The ZeroLine, and also a serving member in the Ukrainian armed forces in the battle against Russia and their war crimes and their invasion of Ukraine. She has served on the front lines. She has served not only as a combat medic, but now also as someone who is helping to spread the word and get out there and wage the vital information war against the Russians in this enormously important moment of the battle. Sarah, hey, thank you so much for jumping on today. I know how slammed you are, and we really appreciate having you here. Tell us a little bit about not only the state of play in Ukraine right now, but also about the podcast, because I am so excited about that.
Rick, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Resolute Square team. Having written for Resolute Square since October and now doing this podcast, one of the most important aspects of it is that Resolute Square has given me the opportunity to discuss the wider scenarios surrounding Ukraine's war for liberty and liberation against the Russian invaders. And ultimately, coming off the heels of the NATO summit, which has to be looked at as a success, despite what some of the chaos agents were trying to spin it as, we understand just what a role Ukraine is going to be playing, not just in the immediate battles in order to deoccupy the Ukrainian territory, but also what it will mean for freedom across the globe moving ahead into 2030, 2040, 2050. Because ultimately, this victory that the armed forces of Ukraine is waging, or this victory that the armed forces of Ukraine will achieve on behalf of the people of Ukraine, can be multiplied for every person who cares about freedom and democracy across the globe.
The longer question, as you point out, this is going to shape Europe for generations to come, for decades to come. And so as we've seen the beginnings of the counteroffensive, and again, the chaos agents wanted to immediately portray it as, oh, it's already failed. It seems to me that there's being slow and steady progress across on the Eastern Front throughout the country. And that the fragility inside of Russia, especially since the Wagner coup with Prigozhin, has started to be even more evident. It strikes me, and I'd love to get your take on this, that Russia is running through its inventory of people and weapons at a pretty fast clip. And while they had time to build this big defensive sort of wall, essentially, of minefields and structures, it strikes me that Ukraine is making key strategic breakthroughs across the Eastern Front.
Let me go ahead and just address the first statement. Russia will never run out of people, nor will they run out of weapons. And that's what makes this such an insidious fight. Ultimately, one of our commanders in the Air Force stated that they can create missiles forever. Their technology is lacking. Their weapon stocks are not modern, but nonetheless, they can inflict damage. And this is what we're fighting through, especially when it comes to the landmines. Sure. And yet, to amplify the point you just made, we are making progress across both the Eastern Front and Southern Fronts. We have liberated, since the beginning of the counteroffensive actions, more than 200 square kilometers just in the south. And we are also liberating a significant amount on the Bakhmut direction, while holding Russian forces in the north of the Kharkiv Oblast area. So across all the front, which is more than 1,100 kilometers, more than 700 miles, we are winning the war against the Russian invaders. However, everyone expects this to be a movie where we win within an hour or two. That's not what it is. It is tough going against an enemy that's willing to kill and maimed, for every one of our men and women, they're willing to give up one of theirs. And this is what we're fighting. And that's why, yes, it's a war of attrition. And when you hear the term meat grinder, it's not us. We care about lives. It's what the Russians are willing to do to their own people. And so when the United States and other allies announced such support for us at the NATO summit, that just confirmed the progress we are making towards this ultimate transformative defeat of the Russian enemy and an ultimate victory for us and the world at large against tyranny.
What kind of things you're going to be covering and the guests you've had on and are planning to have on in the near future?
What was amazing is we kicked off with an incredible guest on the ZeroLine. We started off with Alexander Sherba, who's currently the ambassador for strategic communications of Ukraine. He had been stationed at the Ukrainian embassy in the United States and was previously the ambassador to Austria for Ukraine before he was brought into this role. Next week, we're going to have a soldier on who was an American attorney turned Ukrainian soldier who actually wrote a memo for us on my trip to Washington, D.C. He sat in on some meetings regarding the cluster munitions that are so talked about. Moving forward, we hope to have members, or at least former members of Congress on, as well as some of the brightest minds in global policy. This is not just a podcast focused on Ukraine. It's a podcast focused on what Ukraine's victory will mean for the greater war in the fight against despotism and for democracy. Something that you, Rick, and so many others associated with Resolute Square understand all too well back home in the United States.
Well, Sarah, thank you again so much for joining us today. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Hope to see you over there in country in the next few months. We're going to try to get over there soon and be well and keep up the fight and look forward to hearing more from the ZeroLine and talking to you very soon. Thanks, Sarah.
Rick, thank you so much, and keep up the fight yourself. We appreciate everything you and the others are doing.
Thanks again for listening to The Enemies List. If you have any comments, questions, or if there's someone you'd like to hear on the podcast, hit me up on Twitter at @TheRickWilson. Thanks again for the wonderful support you've shown the pod. We're growing fast. It really helps if you will share this with your friends, your family, and anyone else who, like us, is trying to save democracy. While you're at it, if you could rate and review the podcast, I would be very much appreciative. I know this is the sort of thing you've heard a billion times. Please rate, review, like, blah, blah, blah. But you need to do it. It really does help us a lot. We are slaves to the algorithm, my friends. And if you do this, it will help get the pod out further. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time. And remember, whatever you do, stay off the list.